Hey everyone, thanks for tuning back in. Brendan here, aka Cliff Jumper, and today we are dealing with a kind of a typical old car problem, especially if you've ever changed the fuel pump on your Corrado or your Mk1, Mk2, Mk3 Volkswagen. It's all the same, it works exactly the same. So here's the issue. You change the fuel pump, put gas in it. You know there's gas in it, but the tank is still reading 0. So your fuel pump sender, there's something going on with it that needs to be addressed. Or you haven't changed the fuel pump. The fuel pump's working fine, but you're having that same issue. You know you put gas in it, but the fuel sender gauge, the fuel gauge is reading weird. You know, it's not consistent. A lot of times what happens, especially if you have a lowered car with a stiff suspension, you might hit a bump and it might shock that sender unit loose in your car, and it might just be floating around in there rather than actually doing what it's supposed to do. So that's what we're looking at today. Let's get into it. So if you've never gone into dealing with the fuel pump before, here's the deal. There's this locking ring around it that you have to loosen. Now, I highly recommend spraying some penetrating lube on it, letting that sit for a while before you try to remove it, because otherwise it is really hard to get off of there. Before you take off the locking ring, you want to remove both of these hoses. So I've loosened the hose clamp. I'm just going to convince this to get out of the way. Let's put a little spray lubricant in there. These hoses are pretty old, so I don't want to thrash them. I do want to convince them to come off though. Now that those are out of the way, you can just use a screwdriver. Now I already loosened this, that's why it's coming off really easily. You want to use a lot of lubricant, spray it on there, let it sit for a while, and then you just tap on each tab gently, and it will eventually start to spin. It takes a while sometimes for it to get going, but looks like we are at the point where it is off the threads, so that's good. Go ahead and rotate those out of our way. Pull that up. This can just sort of get tucked off to the side. And now we should be able to remove the top lid. Oh, look at that. This whole thing is just floating loose in there. The fuel pump is supposed to lock into the bottom of the tank, and it's not locked in at all. It's just hanging out there. So no wonder the sender is not doing anything it's supposed to. Let's see if we can lock that back in place. Oh, looks like the whole sender unit is just totally loose. It's not even on there. So, yeah, this is just gotta. Look at that. The whole thing is loose. That's not on there at all. So this is the sender. It is supposed to be locked in here. And it probably came loose because the whole thing was just bouncing around in there. So these little locking tabs, there. See how that's locked in now? Squeeze these together, they unlock and it comes out. Put it back in, lock, lock. Now the sender unit is in place. So let's get this back in there. Now I found the bracket where it's supposed to lock in place, and now I'm gonna turn it. All right, so the fuel pump is now locked in where it's supposed to be. See how it's sitting straight down there? It is supposed to, yeah, be locked in place. There's a bracket in the bottom of the tank that it locks into, and that keeps it in place. So that's now locked in. I'm gonna double check the float. It should be, okay, I'm just checking by feel. It actually is floating, so it's where it's supposed to be. So that's good. That's our issue there. Now I just gotta put it all back together. Part of that's gonna involve this wonderful gasket. So these hoses are gonna wanna go back into the tank. We're going to want to turn this. Make sure the gasket's actually sitting flush against the sides. There we go. And you want that facing forward so that the fuel lines can fit on it. Now this is opposite of what we did before. There is a factory tool for this, which can make life a lot easier in terms of getting this thing pushed down and threaded. I do not have that factory tool, so it is just kind of the brute force screwdriver approach. Let's go see if it worked. And just like that, it's all back together. And certainly, just do a verification check here that we have a functioning fuel gauge. So just turning it on. And look at that. It takes a little while for the older fuel gauges to actually do their thing, but there you go. Look, it's going up slowly but surely, showing the true fuel level in the tank as it should. There we go. Great. And everything works as it should. All right, so what happened there? I didn't film when I went back in, but what we had happen inside this is there are a couple of things that happen with the fuel sender. The fuel sender, as I showed you, does clip into the fuel pump unit itself. There's those two little tabs that have to securely clip in for it to work. The other thing is at the bottom of the sender, there are two electronic clips, which are really very shabbily put together. It just slides up and banana clips on, or not banana clips. It's got these little pinchy clips that pinch onto the bottom of it, and that is what actually sends signal to the fuel gauge in the cluster. So in this case, we had three things happen. The pump itself had come unclipped. It clamps into the bottom of the tank. You put it in and turn it just like 90 degrees, and it clips into the bottom of the tank itself. It had come unclipped and the whole thing was floating around, which made the sender come all loose, and it was just banging around in there too. When I put the pump back into place and clamped it in place, and I made sure that the sender was clipped in place, I didn't check the electric fittings on the bottom to make sure that they were still clipped in place, and they were not. They were just hanging loose in the tank. So when I took it back apart again, found those, clipped those onto the bottom of the sender, made sure that the sender was properly oriented, and you have to make sure that when you put the pump in place in there, that it's oriented so that the sender isn't going sideways this way, because it will interfere with the tank. Kind of dips down in the middle here, and it won't go up all the way if you put it there. So it has to be oriented so that it goes back this way, and it's got all the room to go up and down and actually monitor the fuel level. So orientation matters, and making sure everything is actually plugged in together matters. It's all back together. I took it for a test run. I put gas in it. I've driven it 50 miles. It's working. So mischief managed, and we'll call that job done. Hope that helped you out if you're having similar things. So those 3 things to look for: make sure that your fuel pump is bolted in, make sure that the sender is clipped in, and make sure the electronic harness is actually clipped to the bottom of the sender, and make sure it is oriented the right way when you put it in. So 4 things I can count. Hope that helps. God bless. Let me know how I can be praying for you, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.
And on that terrible disappointment, it's time to say goodbye. We'll be back.